You're watching Taking Stock on ENCA. Reuel Khoza is the chairman of the PIC. He arrived at a dysfunctional institution, is 6 months into the job, but it's only a short-term contract, this one, isn't it? Because I don't want to break any bad news to anyone, but you'll be 70 next year, and I think even the public service has a cut-off date in terms of how long you can stay on boards.
Public service, as well as many corporations in the UK, at 70 they show you the door. It doesn't matter how effective or fancy you are. And if you have been in service for 9 years, they show you the door. It doesn't matter how adequate to the task you fancy you are.
You've got 9 months to go.
We've got some 9 months to go.
You've got time for a rebirth then of the public investment.
Correct. And we'll be addressing a number of things. First, the structure of the organization and resourcing the positions that are actually acting positions or are vacant now. And, decoupling some of the major positions that have been collapsed into one by the erstwhile chief executive. He arrogated to himself the position of chief investment officer. So you had a chief investment officer and a chief executive officer in one person in himself. No checks and balances there. Nobody asking the other whether or not they're actually behaving as they should.
I mean, this is a failure on so many levels. It's a failure at executive level. It's a failure at previous board level as well. I mean, the board was not holding the executive to account. That is surely the purpose of the board.
Correct. Well, in fact, that's how they came to see it fit, thanks to them, to see it fit to actually resign en masse. And there are two members of that previous board that are actually serving on the current board. We 14, 15 all in all, and the rest are new, invited, I believe, on the basis of their track record. Virtually all of them have earned their stripes, and they're known for their adherence to good corporate governance.
I mean, this is the country's biggest piggy bank. It is a very attractive pool of money. And politicians, when there is money around, like to get their hands in it, some to do good work and some, of course, to help themselves, as we've seen in South African history. I mean, you've got a big fat key and a padlock to make sure that nobody gets access to the money. How do you protect the PIC?
Well, I believe we were appointed or invited for a reason. And our belief is that first, competence is key. But second, ethical behavior, ethical conduct. And those are underscored by a number of values, amongst them integrity, accountability, responsibility, fairness, transparency, and all of those. And if you take those into account, those who thought this was a place to go and harvest where they have not even planted, I think they got some ugly thing coming.
What if you were asked by government or by the ANC, because we know that the Secretary General of the ANC, Eskom, has spoken previously about quantitative easing and wouldn't it be nice to get access to more capital, and there's been talk of nationalising the Reserve Bank. That's died down a bit. But the PIC and its asset base, in terms of rebuilding the country, this idea that we can get prescribed assets where pension funds are forced to invest in government projects, it scares the living daylights out of anybody who's got any kind of pension plan.
I think so.
Where do you stand in terms of prescribed assets as chair of the PIC? Would you stand in defence of pensioners' assets and just say simply absolutely not to government or a political party if they said there should be prescribed assets?
That is a stance that has been taken to date, and we would insist on maintaining that stance for good reason. If you were a government employee and somebody told you today that your pension will be raided right now, you'll feel very, very uncomfortable.
But nobody would use that language. They would say
they would say things like, use euphemisms.
Yeah, they would say Eskom could go bankrupt. Eskom has got a 450 billion rand debt burden. You know what? The PIC can become a shareholder, and if the PIC gives us 200 billion rand, they can have they can have a 20% stake in Eskom into the future.
That will be open to discussions, because we are investors in Eskom as it is now. In the region,
gone through the bond market as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, it's actually through the bond investment that is in the region of 95 billion. Now, if for whatever good reason you could convert that into equity, you would actually relieve Eskom of its heavy interest payment. But that has got to be discussed in a manner that will make sure that if indeed we convert to equity, that is not going to be exposed to disappearance. The disappearance of a value and funds that have actually disappeared there. It will not be without conditions.
I mean, trust is broken down in South Africa. There's very little trust between public and private sectors. There's very little trust between citizens and public sector, citizens and corporate, for that matter as well. And it's hardly surprising. I mean, South Africa has been raided from so many different angles over the last decade and longer. Yeah. How do we restore trust?
And the president has actually said, $1 trillion has been frittered away. To recover that will be a big challenge. But I believe we begin to address that by making sure that the leadership that surfaces in these parastatals or state-owned enterprises is leadership in which society can believe, and that they actually behave in terms of that expectation. When it comes to governance, they should actually never flinch. They should never be wavering. They should actually be steadfast in making sure that there is no looting. Where this board is concerned, that kind of malfeasance is not going to be countenanced whatsoever. We're looking after a pension fund that actually has got to perform for pensioners first and foremost.
Reuel Khoza is the chairman of the Public Investment Corporation. He used a word in that segment of our discussion, incorruptible. About 18 months ago, he used that word in a different discussion that he and I had, and that was to do with a long bond that he has with South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa. They went to university together. He describes that 18 months ago as an incorruptible bond. Let's test that in a moment.